So high-speed rail is a top transportation priority for the Obama administration. The president has said that he would like to make fast trains accessible to 80% of Americans within 25 years. Now, Democrat-led states like New York have seen windfalls of federal high-speed rail funding, thanks to Republican governors who returned to the cash to bolster their credentials as fiscal conservatives. Since 2010, New York has received $362 million originally allocated for projects elsewhere. $354 million of that was announced just yesterday. The money will be used for several projects, including upgrades to tracks or stations in Rensselaer, Schenectady, and Rochester. That is actually far from sufficient to bring true high-speed rail to New York. That's a very complicated proposition, and it has been discussed since Mario Cuomo was governor. Things have been further complicated by several recent train accidents and renewed concerns about potential terrorist attacks on the national rail system. Joining me for more train talk is the Deputy U.S. Secretary of Transportation, John Porcari. He's in Rochester today. Mr. Porcari, it is a pleasure to see you. Welcome to Capitol Tonight.
Thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure to be here.
And welcome home, since you, as it turns out, are originally from Rochester, and that's where you're joining us from. So thanks for being here.
Yeah.
If you would just tell us, the announcement that was made today, you are in the city because of what we learned yesterday, which is that New York is getting about $354 million of the $2 billion that Florida's governor said thanks but no thanks to. So what were the details of today's news?
Well, today was a very important day, Liz, here in Rochester. Alstom, who's a rail component manufacturer, announced that they're adding 200 jobs to their plant here in the Rochester metro area. These are good-paying, family-supporting jobs that are a direct result of President Obama's investment in high-speed rail. What we're doing is building the rail infrastructure of tomorrow, but what it creates is jobs today. There's no better illustration than here in Rochester and 200 jobs. It was a very festive atmosphere at the plant today, I can tell you that.
And they actually, Alstom does rail signaling, right?
That's correct. In Rochester, they build rail signals, including what's called positive train control, which is an important safety advance that's a fail-safe system to keep trains apart. In Hornell, they assemble trains.
So now the money that we actually saw yesterday is leftover money that Florida gave back, and actually Florida originally got $2.4 billion, but 400 million of that doesn't exist anymore. Essentially, it was zeroed out in the final deal that the House Republicans are interested, obviously, in cutting, in that final budget deal that kept the federal government open and running. The president has said he would like $53 billion over 6 years for high-speed rail. Is that going to be a reality, do you believe? I mean, aren't the House Republicans going to be seeking more cuts in the future?
Well, we think there's an imperative here. First of all, America is going to have 100 million more citizens by 2050, 39 years from now, which is kind of the day after tomorrow in transportation planning terms. If you think our road network and our airports are congested today, add 100 million people. That's one of the reasons that we're so excited about high-speed rail. And if you couple that with the environmental benefits and what it does to revitalize cities and towns along each corridor, then you see that it's not a solution, but it's a very important addition to our transportation toolbox. It's one that overwhelmingly citizens have been very supportive of, and yesterday's announcement was a very important one for New York State and upstate New York in particular.
Well, and actually, when I say that Republican governors have been giving back the money, there's actually one Republican governor who changed his mind about giving back the money. So you see that actually when it comes to redevelopment and economic development projects, that sometimes actually pragmatism trumps politics when it comes to trains.
I think it comes down to economic development as well, and Governor Snyder in Michigan clearly understands that part of redeveloping Michigan and rebuilding the economic base involves high-speed rail. And taking the largest city in Michigan, Detroit, and connecting it to Chicago, the hub of a network, with 110-mile-an-hour service is one of the best single ways to rebuild Michigan and create job opportunities in the short term. It's really not about party. It's about the past versus the future. And we believe as well, and you can see it in 34 states around the nation that are moving forward with high-speed rail projects, that it's a critical part of what we need to do for the future, for the next generation in transportation.
But what we're talking about here, as I mentioned earlier, obviously, I mean, high-speed rail is something that viewers of this show and New Yorkers in general are used to hearing about and never really seeing. I mean, what we're really talking about now is improvements to tracks to bring higher, with an ER, speed rail, but not necessarily high-speed rail like bullet trains that we might be seeing elsewhere in the country.
Well, Liz, we are clearly in a rebuilding mode in passenger rail. There's some very positive, immediate improvements that you'll see. Part of yesterday's announcement, for example, is that New Yorkers using the Northeast Corridor will see speeds increase on a portion of that corridor from 135 to 160 miles an hour. Now, that is truly a high speed. From New York City to Albany, where we have capacity issues, because it's so popular, it will relieve some of the capacity constraints. Here in Rochester, the final design money for a new intermodal station that will be an anchor for the redevelopment of a portion of the city of Rochester is part of it as well. So we're moving forward on all fronts. We didn't get into this overnight. We won't get out of it overnight. But the most important thing to think about is really transportation is a foundational investment in the economy of the future. New York wouldn't be the Empire State if the Erie Canal had not been built, and upstate New York in particular would not have the economy that it's enjoyed without that kind of investment. We think over the longer term, high-speed rail has the same effect, the same positive economic impact, and when you couple that with the fantastic workforce and great quality of life in upstate New York, it has real possibilities.
Do you actually believe that that high-speed rail of the kind that I'm talking about, extremely high-speed rail, the kind that cuts down travel time from 2 hours to 1 hour or even less, for example, between Albany and points south, is actually possible given the track problems that we have here and the complications of shared tracks and the age of the track system and the fact that the track isn't electrified necessarily?
It is absolutely possible. We think it's realistic, and we are well on the way to doing that. There are many examples around the world where true high-speed rail successfully shares the rails with, shares the track with freight systems. They coexist very well. You'll also see dedicated corridors here in America where you have only passenger service, and it's underway in California right now, for example. Even the short-term improvements, the things that were announced yesterday, one specific improvement, Detroit to Chicago, for example, is going to shave a half an hour off that trip right now.
You know, here's the problem, though. There was just actually a derailment. It's sort of an unfortunate time to be announcing anything that has to do with rail because, of course, there was a problem with an Amtrak train, for example, and they're still not exactly certain why that derailment occurred, but that train was only going 60 miles an hour. I mean, if we can't control a train that was going 60 miles an hour, why would we want a train to go 100+ miles an hour?
If we're honest with ourselves, Liz, and we look around at the infrastructure, rail and otherwise, in this country, we know that it was designed and built and paid for by our parents and our grandparents, and in some cases in New York by our great-grandparents. This is really about reinvesting, and the incident that you refer to would not have been nearly as severe in its impact had the Herald interlocking, which is one of the projects that was funded yesterday, been in place. Amtrak would have had more options. So it's really about correcting the disinvestment that we've had as a nation. Make no mistake, transportation is economic development. Transportation leads directly to economic growth. We need to make that kind of foundational investment. Somehow, in recent years, we've lost our way. What President Obama is saying is, if you give Americans a chance, we can out-invest, outwork, and outperform the world.
Do you believe, and it's not possible for any of this $354 million, for example, to be used for security? I mean, after the raid on bin Laden's compound that ended in his death, we have now since known that there was supposedly an attack being planned on rail in America, and that has made a lot of people concerned about security, of course, but we can't use any of this money for that.
Well, those are actually separately funded efforts. Since September 11th, 2001, we've been working very diligently with the commuter railroads, Amtrak and others, to minimize that vulnerability. I'd urge you to actually look at the record for safety and security for rail. It is extraordinarily safe. and secure. We want to continue to make it that way. There are new technologies that are being implemented. There's new efforts that are going on with the Department of Homeland Security and local law enforcement partners that really greatly assist in those efforts. It is a safe and secure system, but that work is never done.
Mr. Porcari, we're unfortunately out of time, but I want to thank you very much for joining us and being with us from Rochester. Thanks a lot.
It's my pleasure. We're really excited to be able to invest in the future for upstate New York and the entire state.